Good morning, viewers, and welcome to the last edition of the week on Newspaper Headlines. The front pages are packed full with interesting stories to make your day. As Buhari seeks approval for $5.53 billion loan. On another development, Labour threatens strike over deductions and retrenchment. These and more stories make the headlines this morning. I am Rachel Ibunu. We start this morning with the Daily Trust, and I'll take it from the lead story. How bandits killed over 70 in Sokoto. The kicker says 270 lives lost in 20 deadly attacks. This is coming from the group. Excellence give permission for weddings and markets. Buhari orders onslaught. Tambuwal to meet president. See the story on page 4. And we have these on May 23, APC manifesto. Questions over Buhari's key campaign promises. We have about 10 of them: next level, national security, rule of law, education and health, amongst others. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 5. The bottom strip stories on page 3. COVID-19. Federal government seeks $5.513 billion external loan. Other diseases killing Nigerians more than COVID-19. This is coming from the federal government, and you can find the details on page 4. On page 31, federal government, Obasanjo expressed support for additional. This is coming from the African Development Bank president. And above the lead story, which happens to be the last story on Daily Trust newspaper, front page comments. 3 years to make history. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 16. We go to the next paper, which is the Leadership Friday edition, and I'll take it from the lead story. It says 21 years of interrupted democracy. Northern and Southern leaders converse better deal for Nigerians. The kicker says President Muhammadu Buhari has done well in 5 years. This is coming from the presidency. President restates debt cancellation for African countries. Seeks NAS approval of $5.513 billion loan to fund 2020 budget. Consoles victims of Sokoto attack. Others fears military action against bandits. Governors bow to pressure. Set up committee on legislature, judicial autonomy. And the picture is that of President Muhammadu Buhari participating in the United Nations virtual high-level event on financing for development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond, from the presidential villa Abuja. This happened yesterday. And COVID-19 update as of May 28, 2020. Confirmed cases 1,915. I beg your pardon. Confirmed cases 8,915. Discharged patients 2,592. And number of deaths so far 259. This is from NCDC. Nigeria rejects U.S. call for independent probe of additional. The kicker says AFDB, that is the Africa Development Bank, denies sacking him, insists there is no crisis in bank. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 6. The bottom strip story is on page 35. Food security. Why Nigeria must not repeat the crude oil misadventure. Our story is on page 35. 74 political parties lose out as court affirms INEC's power to deregister. See the details on page 2. On page 11, federal government tests 1,422 daily. Decries lack of attention for non-COVID-19 patients. The story can be found on page 11. And the last story below the masthead. Apple Music names DJ Copy first radio show host in Africa. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 35. Next is New Telegraph newspaper, and I'll take it from the top. It says CBN cuts MPR, that is the monetary policy rate, to 12.5% to boost lending. Emefiele, Nigeria may escape recession. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 4. On page 27, NNPC Mole's oil production costs crashed to $10 per barrel. And below the masthead, we are recording more death from other ailments than COVID-19. This is coming from PTF, and you can find the details on page 5. On page 27, court okays the registration of 74 political parties. Nigeria police restructures, redeploy 9 CPs. The details can be found on page 3. And on page 26, Africa Development Bank crisis, federal government, Obasanjo rally support for additional. That's on page 26. And the lead story says Labour threatens strike over deductions, retrenchment, warns against budget cuts, retention of security votes. Has the kickers, governors, AGF, that is the Attorney General of the Federation, meets on fiscal autonomy of legislature and judiciary. Buhari has delivered on mandate, says presidency. See the details on pages 5 and 25. An inside story. COVID-19. NDDC shuts down headquarters over director's dead. See the details on page 8. On that same page 8, NCAA, that's the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, issues post-COVID-19 rules for international flights. Page 8. Edo, community transmission alarming. This is coming from Obaseki, and you can find the details on page 7. On that same page, again, NCDC, Kogi fights over coronavirus. IMF disburses $22 billion to 60 countries. The story can be found on page 25. And COVID-19 global cases. So far, 5,865,933 global recovery. 2,569,431 global death. 360,346. And below this picture, Buhari seeks NAS approval for $5.513 billion loan. PDP, President auctioning Nigeria on world markets. See the details on page 4. And the last story on New Telegraph. High anxiety increases risks of depression. See the details on page 26. We'll go to the next paper this morning, which is This Day newspaper, and I'll take it from the lead story. It says CBN cuts MPR to 12.5%. Upbeat Nigeria will head off recession. The kicker says disburses 107 billion naira in intervention funds. Emefiele calls for gradual reopening of economy. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 10. Federal government moves to save additional's job, rejects fresh investigation. See details on page 8. And the picture is that on the global stage. President Muhammadu Buhari during the United Nations virtual high-level meeting on financing for development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond at the presidential villa Abuja. This happened yesterday. And below the masthead, COVID-19, federal government to engage 800,000 volunteers to sensitize communities. Task force submits reports to Buhari on Sunday. 182 new cases bring total to 8,915 with 259 dead. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 10. Above the masthead, DJ Copy hosts Apple Music's first radio show in Africa. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 10. And the last story on this day newspaper, Buhari has performed credibly, says presidency. See the details on page 5. All right, we pause here to go for a short break. When we return, newspaper headline continues with more. Please stay tuned.
How do I get tested? If you fall into any of these previously mentioned categories, remain in self-isolation and immediately call your state hotline or the NCDC toll-free line on the screen. The State Ministry of Health, supported by NCDC, will arrange for sample collection and transportation to the lab. Where can I get tested? There are several labs in Nigeria for the testing of COVID-19, and these labs are currently rapidly being expanded across the country to reduce turnaround time from when the samples are taken to when they are tested for the disease. And you can only get tested if you fit the criteria as previously mentioned and a sample has been collected for testing by the state team. What do I do if my COVID-19 test is positive? If your result is positive, please do not panic. Many people who have the infection will show mild symptoms and they can recover quickly with just supportive care. And most of the cases recorded till date in Nigeria are mild to moderate and are clinically stable. What do I do if my COVID-19 test is negative? If your result is negative, it means that you are not infected at the time your sample was taken. However, it is still possible to get infected. Therefore, you should continue to practice social distancing. Wash your hands with soap and running water all the time. Use alcohol-based hand rub frequently and clean your environment all the time. Should I come to the Nigeria Center for Disease Control to get tested? No. If you fall into any of these previously mentioned categories, please remain in self-isolation and immediately call your state hotline or the NCDC toll-free line on the screen. How do I get tested? If you fall into any of these previously mentioned categories, remain in self-isolation and immediately call your state hotline or the NCDC toll-free line on the screen. The State Ministry of Health, supported by NCDC, will arrange for sample collection and transportation to the lab. Where can I get tested? There are several labs across Nigeria for the testing of COVID-19, and these labs are currently rapidly being expanded across the country to reduce turnaround time from when the samples are taken to when they are tested for the disease. And you can only get tested if you fit the criteria as previously mentioned and a sample has been collected for testing by the state team. What do I do if my COVID-19 test is positive? If your result is positive, please do not panic. Many people who have the infection will show mild symptoms and they can...
Thank you for staying tuned. Let's see what other dailies have to say. We start with Nigerian Tribune, and I'll take it from the top. NDDC offices shut down for 2 weeks after death of finance director. The story starts from the front page. Oyo APC begins reconciliation of aggrieved members. The story can be found on page 59. Below the masthead, INEC has powers to deregister political parties. Court rules. See the details on page 59. And on that same page, governors to engage AGF over autonomy for state legislature and judiciary. COVID-19. Nigeria's Civil Aviation Authority issues new protocols for Nigerian airlines. See the details on page 3. And the lead story, Buhari seeks approval for $5.513 billion loan. The kicker says, submit reverse 2020 budget, FSP to NAS. CBN wants aggressive reopening of economy, reduces MPR to 12.5%. NNPC loses 62 billion naira to oil theft in 16 months. And beside the picture, Buhari creates additional police zonal commands. Oyo, Ondo, Oshun, others get new CPs. See the details on page 61. 15 die in Bauchi canoe accident. See the details on that same page 61. 74 feared killed as bandits attack Sokoto communities. The story can be found on page 61. 21 years of civil rule. Gains, pains, prospects. Economy, many miles crossed, many miles lie ahead. See the details on pages 9 to 16. And on page 38, below the picture, AFDB, that's the African Development Bank, probes African leaders against US over additional. Warns crisis may consume bank. Additional not asked to step down. This is coming from the shareholders forum. The story can be found on page 58. And the last story on Nigerian Tribune, doctors fears causing more deaths in other ailments than COVID-19. This is coming from PTF, and the story can be found on page 59. Next is the Blueprint newspaper, and I'll take it from the top below the masthead. May 29, Buhari's corruption fight stands him out. This is coming from the Natural Oil and Gas Suppliers Association of Nigeria, boss. See the details on page 6. On that same page 6, why I want fresh $5.513 billion external loans. This is coming from Buhari. And the kicker says, insulating economy against pandemic top list. Will expeditiously vet request. This is coming from Lowell. And the story can be found on page 6. On page 22, CBN reduces interest rates on OFIS from 9% to 5%. The lead story, schools, hotels to serve as isolation centers. This is coming from PTF. The kicker says other ailments kill more Nigerians. Insists no remedy until 2021. No valid rapid test kits yet. Solidarity, only hope for humanity. This is coming from Buhari. Story can be found on pages 6 and 7. And this is a comment. 5 years of mixed fortune. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 12. Sokoto attacks. Buhari directs fierce military operations. The story can be found on page 5. And the bottom strip stories. Stock market loses 29 billion naira. See the details on page 22. On page 7, ahead polls. IGP deploys Ondo CPs. 8 orders. Story can be found on page 7. And the last story on the Blueprint paper. Court declares the registration of 74 political parties valid. We go to the next paper, Business Day newspaper. I'll take it from the lead story. CBN's 12.5% MPR means a decline in banks' lending deposit rates. Apex Bank optimistic COVID-19 will be less severe on bank of monetary fiscal measures. I'll take that kicker again. Apex Bank optimistic COVID-19 will be less severe on bank of monetary fiscal measures. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 31. Beside that, Buhari lists achievements on economy, others as administration marks 5th anniversary. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 31. DJ Copy holds Apple first ever Africa radio show in big dollar. Story starts from the front page and it continues on page 31. An inside story. AFDB, Obasanjo, Finance Minister rally support for additional against external influence. See the details on page 30. And the picture happens to be the last on the Business Day newspaper. Nigeria Air Force personnel display the locally produced automatic ventilator for COVID-19 at the NAS base in Kaduna. All right, that is on Business Day newspaper. This is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of newspaper headlines. Thank you for giving us audience. So we come your way next week. I leave you with these from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 8 to 9. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not dismayed. As you go into the weekend, God will direct you. You will endure all the trials that might come your way. Stay tuned for the live broadcast of the burial of late Right Reverend Dr. Engineer Samuel Olukunle Ajani, the pioneer Bishop of the Diocese of Egbad West, Anglican Communion, coming up by 11 a.m. and also prayer hour by 1 p.m. West African time. Have a blessed weekend and bye for now.